So the last thing that we'll touch on real quickly before we get to lunch, and I kind of touched on a little bit in my basics presentation, is how do we talk with the rest of the care team? You know, if it was just us, decisions would get made easily, although that presents its own issues too. But it's usually not just us. There are children and grandchildren and spouses and parents and all kinds of other people involved. And so we need to know, what do we do to make sure that not only are we a team, but that team is mobilized and kind of as much as possible on the same page. You'll hear me referring back to some of the basics that I talked about a lot. But what I think is something important to keep in mind when we're thinking about caregiving as a team is, how do we keep that team together? How do we keep our own relationships from falling apart when our opinions might sometimes differ? I got them already, Emily. So some important things to remember are that we need to be making those decisions as a team, right? The better that we can do that, the better our relationships are going to hold up outside of that caregiving process. We need to be able to divide work and that caregiver load. That doesn't always mean that you have the exact number of tasks that you have, that I have. Sometimes that caregiver load is uneven as far as number of tasks or types of jobs. But that's okay as long as everybody feels like they've got the appropriate amount on their shoulders. And then that level of teamwork. How committed is every person to saying, we're going to do this together? Okay. The hardest part for some people is starting the conversation with other family members. You know, she just kind of does whatever she wants to do, and I don't even know how to talk to her about that. Sometimes just getting over that hump can lead to those helpful conversations. Another reminder for us, we can't do everything at once. If your family is in a mess, we're not going to fix that all here today. But we can do something at once, right? So we can take that first step to improving our communication, right? With those I statements, those facts, that reflective listening, all that stuff. So the first thing to decide, what's going on? I'm flipping, sorry. The first thing that we should talk about is, how do we convene that family? I really recommend a formal family meeting. I know that sounds silly, but, you know, go Brady Bunch style. Hook everybody up and get them all in one place, whether that's virtually over telephone or Skype or whatever, or whether that means that we're all sitting there in the same room. When you convene that meeting, I don't know what's going on with this thing. We need to know who should be a part of that. Who should be a part of that? This is different for every family. Some families think that it's very important to include the person who's being cared for. Okay? Sometimes that's possible. Sometimes they're able to jump in on that conversation, or at least listen and contribute facts and answer questions and those kind of things. In general, this is something that I would definitely recommend, is that person is included on some level. But beyond that, who should be there? The adult children? The spouse? I'm from the South, so when we talk about family meeting, we're talking about grandkids too. They're a part of this, you know, nieces, nephews. Family has a different meaning, so what is it to you? We need to know up front who needs to be included in that so that we can know who our team is. Here in Bloomington, something that I've noticed is that people really root here. You know, I did the same thing. I came here 11 years ago to finish grad school, and I've been here ever since. But what happens for those people who've been here a long time is that often they'll begin aging here, and their adult children will move away. Or maybe they didn't have children. But what they do have is a big group of very committed friends. I have friends that come to my office all the time and are part of that primary care team. So we need to make sure that we're not missing any pieces of this. So when I talk about family, I'm going to use that term pretty loosely here since it means something different to all of us. But anybody that's involved with the caregiving team, I think in general, should be involved in these meetings. The meetings should always be a little bit formal in nature. You know, consider a neutral location so that it doesn't feel like we're meeting at my house because I'm running the meeting. Or, you know, my brother who's trying to take over the world, you know. Maybe we can meet at the house of the person being cared for. Or maybe we can meet at a restaurant that's quiet enough for us to talk, or whatever the case may be. There need to be very clear ground rules. So like when I talked about earlier, silence is consent. That can be a clear ground rule. If you're not talking, you're agreeing. That's the rule, okay? And it needs to convene regularly, whatever that means for you. We need to say, we need to get together once every 6 months or every year or whatever. Not always just when crisis hits. Because if we're talking in between those crises, we're going to feel a lot less emotional, aren't we? We're going to feel like we can concentrate on the overall process of this caregiving, not just putting out the fire that's right in front of us. So when we talk about ground rules, here are some that I have found helpful, is that we're all going to agree as a family team to leave our emotions at the door. Guess what, guys? They're still going to creep in. But if we've laid that as a ground rule, we can remind our team, you sound like you're getting a little frustrated or a little upset. This is the time where we leave those emotions at the door. You can talk about it openly if it's one of your ground rules. Another rule should be let everyone be heard, right? We talked about that in a two-way conversation, but if you're including the grandkids, let the grandkids talk about what they think. Let the person being cared for talk about how they're feeling about this. We need to verbalize a common goal or perspective, and I'll talk about that a little more here in a second. And remembering that we're a team, I've already talked about. One of my favorite ground rules, and this is one that we've actually adopted at our work too, especially when I worked inpatient, is to presume positive intent. So what that means is that even if you and I are butting heads like nobody's business, and I'm so mad at you I can hardly talk, and you're so mad at me I can hardly talk, it helps a lot for me to think that, you know what? If my assumption is that you're trying to help, if my assumption is that you have positive intentions for the person that we're caring for, I'm not quite as angry anymore. Now I can see it as a difference of opinion rather than a personal attack. If I assume that your intent is an attack, I'm going to attack back. You? Or withdrawal, right? If I'm assuming that even though you're making me bananas, the intent is positive, it's a little easier to work together as a team. I always recommend having a preset agenda as well. This always helps people to feel like they've got their 2 cents in. So ask for agenda items earlier, not just your own agenda items. Ask if there are things that people want to talk about. Some things that those might include are, let's talk about how we're all feeling in coping with caregiving. Let's talk about financial issues. Let's talk about upcoming appointments. Let's talk about, somebody updating us all with what sister heard at the last doctor's appointment. If you are the one that's kind of instigating this, you may be the person who has to take charge of how things go. That means that you are not the boss. That means that you're the organizer of this business. And if you make it clear that that's your role, is to organize this and not just to be the boss and get your own way, that can help set the stage for what kind of meeting that you're going to have. So, as the boss, you need to make sure that you know your limitations and strengths. Okay? If there are things that you can't do, ask somebody else in the group to do it. If you're not the financial whiz in the family, say, hey, Nancy, this one's on you. You've got the finance brain. Or you might coordinate a system where it's silo and report back. If you're not all in constant conversation, I'll tell you. If you're not all in constant conversation, you may want to split things up into what I call silos or areas and then report back at your family meeting. Kind of like subcommittees. Hey, you take care of the financial stuff and the bill paying. Hey, you take care of the doctor's visits and the medical decisions. Hey, you take care of making sure that mom gets to her social clubs and her bridge meetings and all that jazz. And then when we get back together, let's talk about how those things went for each of you. Okay? Did I miss a page? Oh, sometimes they go this way and sometimes they go that way. I'm not sure how to change that. Page 3, upper right-hand corner. Thank you. So as the organizer, we need to make sure that we're in charge of making sure that everyone in the group is heard and that we're not just calling the shots. right? I know it's easy to come in and say, here are the things that we need to do, here's what I think needs to happen, but we need to make sure that we step back, that we give folks their time to talk, that we use that reflective listening, and that we set the stage for this to be a team effort. We also need to delegate and ask for help. I think that asking for help is a tough one, and we're going to talk about that in quite a bit of detail in a minute as well. So instead of dictating and directing. Then we also need to make sure that with those family meetings, even if we come with the perfect agenda and everybody's there, things don't always go perfectly, do they? So we need to make sure that we're flexible, and as needs change or new concerns come up, that we're able to roll with those punches a little bit. So once we know who's on the team, once we've started that conversation, once we've let everyone be included and voice their point of view, who gets to make the final say? Here's another place where your family might differ. This is really important to decide up front. If we disagree about something, who's the deciding vote? Is it the person being cared for? I'd say if they're cognitively intact, absolutely. Sometimes that's not the case, or sometimes that person being cared for doesn't want to make the decision. So perhaps it could be the person who's the primary caregiver. Do they get to break the tie if they're the one living there? In a lot of families, it's the power of attorney. Or is it a total democracy? Do we take a vote and see what happens? Guess what? It's not always this easy either. There will be disagreement that comes up. Even if you are communicating well, even if everyone feels like a part of the team, there are going to be times when opinions differ, right? So when dealing with disagreement, we're going to go back and remember that common goal. The goal is to take the best care of this person that we can, right? We're going to pick our battles. We talked about that already. Is it worth fighting for? We're going to avoid jumping to conclusions or taking over. You know, I hear families say things like, well, my brother just wants to be in charge. Well, how do you know? Well, because he always comes in and takes charge. Okay, is that because nobody else is making decisions? Is that, what is really going on behind that? Change perspectives. Has anybody done this as a parent? Asked your kids, how would you feel if you were in her shoes? That's a lesson that doesn't die when we're kids, guys. How might this look to somebody who's with that person 24/7? How might this look from somebody who's really worried about finances, or from the daughter who was always mom's favorite, or whatever? Try to grab, come on, don't laugh, we know it happens. In my family, it's not me, it's my youngest sister. How might it look from that other point of view? Because perhaps if we can see it, we can get back to that helpful conversation, even if not agreement right away. We have to go back to remembering compromise is key. We talked about that quite a bit. We also might want to get creative and outsource to other people. And what I mean by that is if there is just a disagreement that you are deadlocked in, call in the pros. Call in, a social worker, or an elder care manager, or a chaplain, or somebody from your church that you trust, or anybody like that that's kind of a neutral party to this scene, and say, we need you to help us work through this disagreement. So for those of you that said you were part of a faith community, this is a really great place to find that person that will try to be as neutral as possible, but still maybe have some of your same values. And always remember, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, right? What was that? All right, I won't ask then. Any questions about that? I think I'm already a couple minutes past my time, so I'll try to hurry through the end of this unless we have questions here. Okay. Another common problem that I have, other than starting the conversation and dealing with those contentions, is how do you ask for help? I get caregivers that come to me all the time and say, I'm totally overwhelmed, I don't know what to do with this. And I say, well, do you have family? Do you have friends? And they say, yeah, but I don't want to bother them. I don't want to ask for help because I'm the caregiver and I'm supposed to be doing this. It can be a really hard hurdle to jump. But when you're finally at that place where you think, gosh, I can ask for help, I can get help with these things, first we want to define help and what that means. In the binders that we gave you, there is a page that's divided down the middle. And it's from the Family Caregiver Alliance. But there are 2 different columns on that page, and I'm not sure what color it is. Can one of you try to find that in the binder and let me know? But one side of that,
it's the first blue page.
It's the first blue page. Thank you very much. One side of that lists all kinds of different things that you might ask for help for. The other side of that lists all sorts of things that people might offer help for. So I think this is a great place to start when you're needing help, is just go down that list. Make a check mark by something that it would help you to have support in. And when somebody calls you and says, "What can I do for you?" you have a concrete answer. You can say, "Oh, you can come over and mow my lawn." "Oh, I would really like somebody to come over and play cards with my mom so that I can go out to lunch with my friends." Whatever. The second column is actually something you can give to somebody who would like to help but doesn't know how. They can check off the things that they are willing and able to do and give that to you because there may be something they hadn't even thought of yet. So the first thing we need to do is know, what the heck do I need help with? Right? And then we need to be honest with ourselves. What can you and can you not do for real? When you know that, we need to take the next step and say, well, what are you willing to do and able to do? Clicker. So we might say to ourselves, I can balance mom's checkbook once a week, take her for groceries, and attend all her doctor's appointments. I might have the means and the skill to do those things, right? But am I willing to do those? I cannot scrub her bathroom weekly in lieu of my own, okay? I can physically do that, but I'm not going to because as a caregiver, that's going to harm me. I can't take her pet to the vet in lieu of attending my child's soccer game or missing my once-a-month lunch with friends. So once we know those things, what we're able and what we're willing to do, we know what we can ask for help in, right? So now what? That was what I just talked about. Some specific suggestions for people can always be helpful. So for family, you might ask a sister or something that comes from Seattle twice a year. You know, since you're not here on the ground to do those daily things, you know, could you pay for a housekeeper so I don't have to do all of that? Can you set mom up for auto bill pay so I don't have to worry about her bills? So before, when I talked about splitting those tasks, again, it doesn't have to be split in order of time, but these things might be really helpful if we don't have to worry about that on top of everything else. You know, with things like friends, can you come over and visit mom? Or could you take her, you know, for a few hours so I can go to my own doctor's appointment? There are also several professional resources out there, and at the end of today, we'll talk about some of these. But if you flip to the very front of your binder, there's some pink pages at the very front of those handouts. And those will list different categories of these things as well. And always remember, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. So once you know what you're willing and able to do, you have to ask, right? You have to reach out and ask. I always recommend picking the best time to do that when people are as little stressed as possible, when they're in a good mood, when they're feeling that Christmas spirit, right? And we talked about keeping a list. Also consider people's interests and abilities. If they're really good at something or if they enjoy it, ask them to do that because they might really like to do it. Don't be forceful with people. Don't blame or shame them. Don't say, I need you to do this because you never do anything. But also avoid weakening your request, you know, saying things like, you know, it would be really helpful if you don't mind, if you could do this. I mean, if you can't, that's fine, but saying something like that really leads people to believe that you don't really need the help as much as you do. So be straightforward with that request. It would really help me a lot if I didn't have to deal with the bills and you could figure out a way for that to happen. Okay. If you feel others are not carrying their own weight, there are some things that you can do about that. One is to delineate. So, you know, giving people, like I was talking about those silos before, you handle this, kind of delegating those things out. Another thing is to investigate. Why are they not doing enough? Do they feel like you've got it under control? Do they feel like they don't know where to start? Are they feeling too emotional about caregiving that they can't handle the details? Sometimes if we know why people aren't helping, we can have that conversation that enables them to be more of a contributor. And we have to initiate that conversation and communicate with them exactly why we need help and what we would like for them to do. And if none of those things work, my final ATE down there is liberate. If you feel you're just bashing your head against a wall and you just can't get that one person motivated, let them go. Sometimes you just can't. And the added stress of trying to get somebody to help out that is not willing or able to help out is doing a lot of harm for us. And so sometimes we just need to cut them free, call it a loss, and move on with another solution. So if you're the primary caregiver, we need to stay connected to that care team by engaging in discussion. If you are not the primary caregiver. Asking how you can help, offering specific things, and just saying thanks to that primary caregiver. If you live far away, there are things that you can do to stay connected to the team as well, like asking for updates, making sure your opinion is heard, and just educating yourself about what's going on with that person and what you can do to help. And then make sure that you're keeping that team in the loop, particularly if they don't all live in town, and they can't be physically there at family meetings. Have a phone tree. I'll call you and tell you what's going on. You call sister, you call dad, on and on. I've seen families with monthly newsletters. That is like above and beyond, I think, but it's great if you're a person that enjoys that kind of thing, or email or blogs. Everyone can have a blog these days. Go for it. So remember, your loved one's care is everyone's primary goal.